I knew the moment I saw Patricia Reynolds marching up my driveway with that clipboard, clutched in her manicured hands, that my Tuesday afternoon was about to go sideways. She had that particular expression on her face that every homeowner in Meadowbrook Hills HOA had come to dread, lips pursed, nostrils flared, and eyes scanning for violations like a hawk hunting field mice. "Mr. Xavier," she called out before she'd even reached my front porch, where I was sitting with a cold beer, enjoying the Georgia sunshine. "I need to speak with you about several serious violations we've documented on your property." I took a long sip of my beer and set it down slowly. "Patricia, what can I do for you?" She stopped at the base of my steps, making a show of looking at her clipboard. "First, your grass is exactly 3¼ inches tall. The HOA regulations clearly state that grass must not exceed 3 inches. Second, you have a decorative gnome in your front garden that has not been approved by the Aesthetic Review Committee. Third, your mailbox post appears to have a chip in the paint on the northwest corner. And fourth, there are reports that you've been parking your work truck in your driveway overnight, which violates Section 12, Paragraph 8 of our community guidelines." I leaned back in my chair. Patricia had been the HOA president for 3 years now, and in that time, she'd made it her personal mission to fine every homeowner in the subdivision at least twice. I'd managed to avoid her wrath so far, but apparently my luck had run out. "That gnome was a gift from my mother," I said calmly. "The grass was mowed 4 days ago and has grown exactly as grass does. The mailbox paint chip happened yesterday when the mail carrier backed into it, which I plan to fix this weekend. And my truck stays in my driveway because, well, it's my driveway." Patricia's expression hardened. "Regardless of your excuses, Mr. Xavier, these are clear violations. I'm issuing you fines totaling $800, payable within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in additional penalties and potential legal action." She thrust a packet of papers at me. I stood up and took them, flipping through the official-looking documents with their stamps and signatures. $800 for grass that was 1/4 inch too tall and a garden gnome. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. "I assure you I am not." The HOA takes these matters very seriously. We have standards to maintain, Mr. Xavier. Property values depend on everyone following the rules. Something inside me snapped. I'd been a good neighbor for 5 years since moving to Meadowbrook Hills. I paid my dues on time, kept my property neat, and never complained about anything. But $800 for nonsense. That was where I drew the line. "Patricia, before you walk away feeling all proud of yourself, there's something I think you should know." She raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" "The HOA's main sewer line. The one that services every single house in Meadowbrook Hills. It runs directly under my property. Has for about 30 years, since before this subdivision was even finished being built." Her face went blank. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that when I bought this house, the survey showed a sewer easement running through my backyard. The HOA's sewer main, the big one, not the little lateral lines, crosses under my land for about 200 feet. I have all the documentation." Patricia's confident demeanor flickered. I'm sure that's not correct. The HOA maintains its own infrastructure on HOA common property." "Nope," I shook my head. "The developer made some unusual choices when this place was built back in the 90s. The main sewer line takes a diagonal route through several private properties, including mine, to connect to the county sewer system. There's a recorded easement, but here's the thing. Patricia, that easement requires the HOA to maintain the line without disrupting my property. And it specifically states that the HOA cannot levy fines or penalties against the property owner for any issues related to the easement area. I watched the color drain from her face. I don't believe you. I'll be happy to show you the documentation. It's all in my closing papers. In fact, my attorney mentioned when I bought the place that I should keep those papers handy, just in case the HOA ever forgot about this little arrangement. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I'll need to consult with the HOA board about this. You do that. And while you're at it, you might want to reconsider these fines. Because if you push this, I might start wondering if the HOA has been properly maintaining that sewer line like they're supposed to. And if they haven't, well, I'd be within my rights to deny access to my property until they're in compliance with the easement agreement, which would make it real hard for you to fix any sewer problems that might come up. Patricia's face had gone from pale to red. Are you threatening to hold the HOA hostage? I'm not threatening anything. I'm just reminding you that property rights work both ways. You want to fine me $800 for a garden gnome? Fine. But don't forget that your entire sewage system depends on my cooperation. She spun on her heel and stalked back to her Mercedes SUV, practically throwing the door open. I watched her peel out of my driveway with a spray of gravel and smiled. It probably wasn't the smartest thing I'd ever done, poking the HOA bear like that, but it sure felt good. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Marcus, who lived 3 streets over in the same subdivision. Hey man, I said when he picked up. Remember how you're always saying Patricia Reynolds is going to push someone too far one of these days? Yeah, why? I think I might be that someone. Marcus laughed. What did you do, Lucas? I filled him in on the whole conversation, and by the end of it, Marcus was howling with laughter. Dude, you actually told her you'd block the sewer line. That's legendary. I didn't say I'd block it. I just said I might have questions about whether they're maintaining it properly. Potato, potato. She's going to lose her mind. You know she's probably on the phone with every board member right now, having an aneurysm about this. Probably. But I'm not paying $800 for a garden gnome. Good for you, man. Someone needs to stand up to her. She fined the Hendersons $2,000 last year because their Halloween decorations stayed up until November 2nd. November 2nd. Like one extra day was going to destroy property values. We talked for a few more minutes before I hung up and went inside. My house was a 3-bedroom ranch with a nice big backyard that backed up to a wooded area. It was one of the reasons I'd bought the place privacy and peace. The sewer easement ran along the back portion of my property, marked by a strip of land where I couldn't plant trees or build structures. Not that I'd wanted to. It was just grass, mowed and maintained like the rest of my yard. I dug through my filing cabinet until I found the folder labeled House Closing Documents. Inside was everything from the purchase agreement to the title insurance policy. I pulled out the survey, a large folded document that showed my property boundaries and all recorded easements. There it was, clear as day, a 20-foot wide easement running diagonally across my backyard, labeled Sanitary Sewer Main Easement, benefiting Meadowbrook Hills HOA. I also found the easement agreement itself, recorded with the county back in 1994. I'd read through it when I bought the house, mostly out of curiosity. The language was pretty standard legal stuff, granting the HOA permanent access to maintain their sewer infrastructure. But there was one clause that my attorney had pointed out as unusual. It stated that the property owner could not be penalized, fined, or restricted by the HOA for any matters related to the easement area, and that the HOA must provide 48 hours notice before accessing the property except in emergencies. Even more interesting was the clause that gave the property owner the right to request documentation of maintenance activities, and to deny access if the HOA was found to be in violation of local health and safety codes regarding the sewer system. My attorney had explained that the developer probably added that language to protect himself originally, since he'd owned all the lots when the easement was created. It was his way of making sure the HOA couldn't turn around and fine him for having a sewer line on his property. But the language had stayed with the property through every subsequent owner. I made copies of all the relevant documents, then scanned them into my computer for good measure. If Patricia wanted a fight, I'd be ready. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when my doorbell rang at 7:30. I answered it to find not just Patricia, but two other people I recognized as HOA board members. There was Gerald Thompson, the vice president, a balding man in his 60s who always wore polo shirts tucked into pleated khakis. And next to him was Sandra Martinez, the treasurer, a stern-faced woman who worked as an accountant. "Mr. Xavier," Patricia said without preamble, "we need to discuss this easement situation." "Come on in," I said, stepping aside. I'd already had my coffee and was feeling charitable. They filed into my living room and sat stiffly on my couch while I took the armchair across from them. "I reviewed the subdivision plat last night," Patricia began, "and there is indeed a sewer easement across your property. However, that doesn't negate your obligation to comply with HOA regulations." I held up the copies I'd made. "Actually, Patricia, it kind of does. According to the easement agreement recorded with the county, the HOA cannot levy fines or penalties against this property for any matter related to the easement area. And since the easement covers my entire backyard where the alleged grass violation occurred, I'd say that's pretty relevant." Gerald leaned forward. "Now, Lucas, let's be reasonable here. That clause was probably meant to protect the property owner from being fined for having a sewer line on their property, not to give them a free pass to violate every HOA rule." "Maybe so," I said, "but the language is pretty clear. No penalties related to the easement area. My grass grows in the easement area, therefore no penalty." Sandra spoke up for the first time. "What about the gnome? That's in your front yard, nowhere near the easement." "True, but the gnome fine is $200. You want to push that, I'll probably just pay it to avoid the hassle. But if you do, I'm going to start asking some questions about the sewer main maintenance, which I'm entitled to do under the easement agreement." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "What kind of questions?" "Well, for starters, when was the last time the HOA had that line inspected? Because according to the county health codes, sewer mains in Georgia are supposed to be inspected every 3 years. I'd like to see the inspection reports for the last, say, 10 years. The three of them exchanged glances. Gerald cleared his throat. "I'm sure we have those records somewhere." "Great. I'll wait for you to provide them. Because if that line hasn't been properly maintained and inspected, and if it's in violation of health codes, then I have the right under the easement agreement to deny the HOA access to my property until the violations are corrected. Which would make it really hard to fix that sewer line if something goes wrong with it." Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is extortion. No, this is property law. You want to fine me for stupid stuff like grass being a 1/4 inch too long. I'm going to exercise my legal rights as a property owner. That's not extortion. That's called standing up for myself." Sandra remained calm. "Lucas, what do you want here? Obviously, we've gotten off on the wrong foot." I appreciated her directness. "I want the ridiculous fines dropped. All of them. I keep my property neat and tidy. I've never caused problems for anyone in this neighborhood. But Patricia has decided to make me her target this month, and I'm not going to roll over for it." Gerald nodded slowly. "If we drop the fines, you'll drop this sewer line issue." I won't drop it entirely, because I'm genuinely curious now about whether that line has been properly maintained. But I won't make it difficult for the HOA, as long as the HOA stops making things difficult for me. I think that's fair. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Sandra put a hand on her arm. Patricia, let's take this back to the board. We'll discuss it at the next meeting. They left without another word, Patricia practically vibrating with anger as she climbed back into her Mercedes. I watched them drive away and felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. I'd won this round, but I had a feeling Patricia wasn't the type to let things go. I was right. Over the next week, I started noticing things. Small things at first. My trash cans were knocked over twice, even though it wasn't windy. Someone left a note on my truck complaining about it being an eyesore, even though it was a perfectly nice Ford F-150 that I kept clean. And I spotted Patricia driving slowly past my house multiple times, clearly looking for new violations to cite. But I also started doing my homework. I filed a public records request with the county for any inspection reports or permits related to the Meadowbrook Hills sewer system. What I found was interesting. The last inspection of the main sewer line had been done in 2014, over 12 years ago. Georgia law required inspections every 3 years for systems that served more than 20 homes. Meadowbrook Hills had over 100 homes. I also discovered that there had been a minor sewer leak reported in 2018 on a property 3 streets over from mine. The county had issued a warning to the HOA to conduct a full system inspection within 90 days, but I couldn't find any record of that inspection ever being completed. I called the county health department and spoke with a woman named Jennifer Caldwell, who worked in the environmental health division. "Hi, I'm calling about the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision sewer system," I said. "I own property that has an easement for the main sewer line, and I'm trying to verify that the system has been properly maintained." Jennifer pulled up the records. "Let me see. Meadowbrook Hills, that's in unincorporated Forsyth County, right?" "Correct." "Okay, I see the subdivision." Looking at our database. That's not good. The last inspection we have on file is from 2014, and there's a note here about a compliance order issued in 2018 that was never resolved. What does that mean exactly? It means the HOA was supposed to conduct a full inspection of their sewer main and submit the results to us, but they never did. We should have followed up on that, but honestly, with budget cuts and staff shortages, things sometimes fall through the cracks. So the system is potentially in violation of health codes. Potentially. Yes. If there's been no inspection since 2014, then they're definitely in violation of the inspection requirements. Whether the actual physical system is in violation would depend on its condition, which we don't know without an inspection. What happens now? Jennifer paused. Well, now that you've brought it to my attention, I'm obligated to follow up. I'll send a notice to the HOA requiring them to conduct a full inspection within 30 days and submit the results to us. If they don't comply, we can issue fines and, in extreme cases, even require them to connect to county sewer if they can't properly maintain their private system. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate your help." "No problem. And thank you for bringing this to our attention. Sewer issues are serious business." I hung up feeling a strange mix of triumph and guilt. I hadn't intended to cause major problems for the HOA. I just wanted them to leave me alone. But if they really had been neglecting the sewer system, that was a legitimate safety issue that needed to be addressed. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Gerald Thompson. "Lucas, we need to talk," he said. His voice sounded tired. "What's up, Gerald?" The county health department just sent us a notice requiring a full inspection of our sewer main within 30 days. They said a property owner filed a complaint. That was you, wasn't it? I didn't file a complaint. I just asked some questions. The health department decided on their own to follow up. Gerald sighed. Do you have any idea how much a full sewer inspection costs? We're looking at $20,000 to $30,000 minimum. And if they find problems, which they probably will given the age of the system, we could be looking at hundreds of thousands in repairs. Then maybe the HOA should have been keeping up with the required inspections all along, I said. This isn't my fault, Gerald. I didn't create this problem. No, but you sure as hell stirred the pot. Patricia is furious. She wants to countersue you for the inspection costs. On what grounds? I exercised my right to request information about infrastructure on my property. Everything I did was completely legal. If anything, the HOA has been negligent in maintaining that sewer line. I know. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying this is going to get messy. The HOA is already running a deficit this year. We don't have $30,000 just sitting around for an emergency sewer inspection. That sounds like a board management problem, not my problem. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Lucas, what if we compromise? We drop all your fines, we leave you alone, and you work with us on this sewer thing instead of against us. I'm not against you, Gerald. I never was. But what does work with us mean? It means we're probably going to need to levy a special assessment on all homeowners to pay for this inspection and any repairs. If you oppose it or cause problems, it's going to make everything harder. We need everyone to cooperate. I thought about it. I didn't want to be the neighborhood villain, but I also wasn't going to be a doormat for the HOA. Here's my position, Gerald. I'll support the special assessment if it's reasonable and necessary. I won't cause problems. But I also want it made crystal clear to Patricia and everyone else on the board that I'm not to be harassed anymore. No more driving by my house looking for violations. No more nitpicky fines. I maintain my property well, and I want to be left alone to live my life. That's fair. I'll talk to the board. And one more thing, I want Patricia's harassment documented. If she continues targeting me after this, I want it on record that the board was aware of the situation and failed to address it. Gerald hesitated. You really think she's harassing you? I know she is. She's driven by my house at least 10 times in the last 2 weeks. My neighbors have noticed. It's weird and inappropriate. Okay, I'll bring it up at the next board meeting. We'll address it. We hung up, and I felt like maybe, just maybe, things were moving toward a resolution. But I should have known better. The following week, the HOA held an emergency meeting to discuss the sewer inspection situation. I didn't attend because I wasn't on the board, but Marcus called me afterward to fill me in. Dude, it was a circus, he said. Patricia spent 20 minutes ranting about you, calling you a troublemaker, and saying you're trying to destroy the neighborhood. Gerald tried to calm her down, but she wasn't having it. She actually proposed that the HOA sue you for the cost of the inspection. On what grounds? I asked. I haven't done anything wrong. That's what Sandra said. She pointed out that you're entitled to request information about the easement and that the HOA's failure to maintain proper records isn't your fault. But Patricia insisted that you only asked because you wanted to cause trouble. That's not true. I asked because Patricia tried to fine me $800 for nonsense. I know. Most people at the meeting know that too. Patricia doesn't have as much support as she thinks she does. A lot of homeowners are tired of her constant fine levying. The Hendersons were there, and they brought up their Halloween decoration fine. Then Mrs. Kowalski from Maple Street talked about how Patricia fined her for having the wrong shade of white paint on her shutters. It turned into this whole thing where people were airing grievances about Patricia's management style. How did it end? The board voted to proceed with the sewer inspection as required by the county. They're going to levy a special assessment of $300 per household to cover the initial inspection cost. And if there are repairs needed, there will be additional assessments. Patricia wanted to make yours higher, but Sandra shot that down immediately, saying it would be discriminatory and illegal. Good for Sandra. Yeah, she's actually pretty reasonable. I think she's getting tired of Patricia's drama too. Oh, and here's the best part. At the end of the meeting, someone made a motion to review the HOA president's conduct and consider whether she's acting in the best interest of the community. The motion passed. They're going to discuss it at next month's regular meeting. I smiled. So Patricia might actually face some consequences for her behavior. Maybe. A lot of people are fed up. You're not the only one she's been targeting. You're just the first one to push back hard enough that it's caused a real problem for her. After we hung up, I paid my $300 special assessment without complaint. I wasn't happy about it, but it was a legitimate expense for infrastructure maintenance. And honestly, it was worth it to know that the sewer system would finally be properly inspected. The inspection took place over 3 days in early September. A specialized company brought in cameras and equipment to examine every foot of the main sewer line. I watched from my back deck as they set up their equipment in my yard, running their cameras through access ports that I hadn't even known existed. When the report came back 2 weeks later, it wasn't good. The sewer main had multiple cracks, several points where tree roots had infiltrated the line, and 2 sections that were on the verge of complete collapse. The company estimated that repairs would cost between $400,000 and $500,000. For a subdivision with 120 homes, that worked out to roughly $4,000 per household. The HOA held another emergency meeting, and this time I attended. The community room at the subdivision clubhouse was packed with angry homeowners demanding to know how things had gotten so bad. Patricia stood at the front, looking defensive. "This is an unexpected situation," she said. "The previous board didn't maintain adequate records, and we had no way of knowing the system was in such poor condition. You had a compliance order from the county in 2018. Someone shouted. "Why didn't you follow up on that?" Patricia's face reddened. "That was before my time as president." "No, it wasn't," Gerald said quietly from his seat on the side. "You were on the board in 2018, Patricia. You were the treasurer then." The room erupted in angry voices. I sat in the back, watching the spectacle unfold. Patricia tried to regain control, but it was clear she'd lost the room. Sandra stood up and raised her voice. "Everyone, please. Fighting about who's to blame isn't going to fix the sewer system. We need to make decisions about how to move forward." A woman I recognized as Mrs. Henderson stood up. "I want to see all the HOA's financial records for the last 5 years. Where has our money been going if not toward infrastructure maintenance?" "That's confidential HOA business," Patricia snapped. "Actually, it's not," I said, standing up. "Georgia law requires HOAs to make financial records available to homeowners upon request. I looked it up." Everyone turned to look at me. Patricia's expression could have melted steel. "Mr. Xavier, you've already caused enough problems for this community," she said. I caused problems. I asked legitimate questions about infrastructure on my property. The problems were already there. You just didn't want anyone to know about them. More voices rose in agreement. Gerald stood up and tried to mediate. "Let's all calm down. Lucas is right about the financial records. Any homeowner can request to review them. And frankly, I think transparency would be good for everyone right now." Sandra nodded. I'll prepare a summary of our finances for the last 5 years and make it available to any homeowner who wants to see it. Patricia looked like she wanted to object, but she was outnumbered. The meeting continued for another hour, with discussions about financing options for the sewer repairs. The board proposed a combination of a special assessment and a loan that would be paid back through increased monthly HOA dues over 10 years. People weren't happy, but they understood it was necessary. Well, most people understood. There was a small group that seemed to think the whole thing could be ignored or that the county should pay for it, but they were in the minority. As people filed out after the meeting, a man about my age approached me. He had dark hair and friendly eyes, and he stuck out his hand. Xavier. I'm David Brennan. I live over on Oak Street. I just wanted to say thanks for bringing this sewer situation to light. My wife and I were looking at buying a bigger house in the neighborhood, but if that sewer line had collapsed and flooded a bunch of properties, we'd all be facing a nightmare. Better to deal with it now. I shook his hand. Thanks, David. I wasn't trying to make waves, but I'm glad something good might come of it. Oh, I think a lot of good is going to come of it. People are finally waking up to how Patricia has been running things. Did you hear? There's a petition going around to call for a special election to remove her as president. Really? Yeah. The Hendersons started it. They need signatures from 40% of homeowners to trigger a recall vote. From what I hear, they're already halfway there. I felt a pang of sympathy for Patricia despite everything. I didn't want to ruin anyone's life, I said. I just wanted to be left alone. David shrugged. She brought this on herself, man. People have been unhappy for a while. You were just the catalyst. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. Sandra released the financial summary, and it revealed some interesting things. The HOA had been spending enormous amounts on landscaping for the common areas, way more than seemed necessary. When people started asking questions, it turned out that the landscaping company was owned by Patricia's brother-in-law. That revelation caused another firestorm. While it wasn't technically illegal, it was definitely a conflict of interest that Patricia had never disclosed. People started digging deeper, and they found other issues. The HOA had paid for Patricia to attend multiple conferences and training seminars, all on the HOA's dime, including one in Hawaii. The clubhouse had been redecorated twice in 3 years, each time using vendors that had connections to board members. Meanwhile, basic infrastructure maintenance had been deferred or ignored entirely. The recall petition gathered enough signatures within 2 weeks. A special election was scheduled for October 15th. Patricia tried to defend herself, sending out a long email to all homeowners explaining her position and accusing me of orchestrating a vendetta against her. I responded with my own email, keeping it brief and factual. I explained what had happened from my perspective, attached copies of the ridiculous fines she tried to levy against me, and included the documentation showing that the sewer easement gave me the right to ask questions about maintenance. I also pointed out that I hadn't started the recall petition and hadn't been involved in any organized effort to remove her from office. I'd simply exercised my legal rights as a property owner. The election results weren't even close. Patricia was removed as president by a vote of 87 to 23. Gerald was appointed interim president until a new election could be held for the permanent position. One evening in late October, Gerald stopped by my house with a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you might want to celebrate," he said with a tired smile. We sat on my back deck watching the sun set over the woods behind my property. "I didn't want it to go this way," I said. "I just wanted her to stop harassing me." Gerald nodded. "I know, but honestly this needed to happen." Patricia was a disaster as president. She was more interested in exercising power than actually helping the community. The stuff with her brother-in-law's landscaping company, that alone should have disqualified her. What happens now? Now we fix the sewer system, try to rebuild trust in the HOA, and hopefully elect a new board that actually cares about doing the right thing. Sandra's running for president. I think she'll win. She's competent and fair, and people respect her. She seems good, I agreed. Gerald took a long drink of his beer. You know, in a weird way, you did this neighborhood a favor. If that sewer line had collapsed, we'd be looking at a catastrophic failure that could have caused sewage backups into people's homes, environmental contamination, and probably lawsuits that would have bankrupted the HOA. The repair costs would have been even higher in an emergency situation. By forcing the inspection now, you probably saved us from something much worse. I just wanted to keep my garden gnome, I said with a laugh. Gerald laughed too. That stupid gnome. You know, Patricia actually proposed an emergency rule specifically banning gnomes after you stood up to her. The rest of the board voted it down. We talked for another hour, mostly about normal things: work, sports, the upcoming holidays. It felt good to just be neighbors without all the drama. The sewer repairs began in November. It was a massive undertaking that involved digging up sections of multiple yards, including a significant portion of mine. The HOA was good about it, though. They communicated clearly about the schedule. They cleaned up thoroughly after each day's work, and they even paid for professional landscaping to restore everyone's yards once the work was complete. Sandra won the election for HOA president in December, and one of her first acts was to implement new policies requiring disclosure of any conflicts of interest and mandatory competitive bidding for all contracts over $5,000. She also established a reserve fund specifically for infrastructure maintenance, with mandatory annual inspections of all major systems. In January, I received a letter from the HOA. I opened it with some trepidation, half expecting another fine for something ridiculous. Instead, it was an apology. Dear Mr. Xavier, it read. On behalf of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA Board of Directors, I want to formally apologize for the treatment you received from the previous administration. Your concerns were legitimate, and you had every right to raise them. The actions taken against you were inappropriate and not in keeping with the values of our community. We appreciate your patience during the recent infrastructure repairs and your willingness to work with us to resolve these issues. We hope that going forward, our relationship will be based on mutual respect and cooperation. It was signed by Sandra and all the other board members. I folded the letter and put it in my filing cabinet, next to all the documentation from the whole mess. It felt good to have closure. Life in Meadowbrook Hills settled back into a comfortable routine. Without Patricia prowling the streets looking for violations, people relaxed. Homeowners still maintained their properties well, but there was less fear and more community spirit. Someone started a neighborhood Facebook group that actually focused on positive things, letting people know about lost pets, sharing recommendations for contractors, organizing social events. In February, I was working in my front yard, planting some new shrubs when a car pulled up that I didn't recognize. A woman in her 30s got out, looking around with interest. "Excuse me," she called. "Is this 247 Maple Drive?" "It is," I said, standing up and brushing dirt off my hands. "I'm Emily Sutton. I'm looking at buying a house in this neighborhood. The realtor told me there was some drama with the HOA recently, and someone suggested I talk to you to get the real story." I laughed. "Who told you to talk to me?" "David Brennan. He said you were the guy who saved the neighborhood from a sewage catastrophe." That's overstating it a bit, but come on up. I'll tell you what happened. We sat on my porch, and I gave her the whole story: the fines, the sewer easement, the inspection, Patricia's removal, and the repairs. Emily listened carefully, asking good questions. "So would you say the HOA is well managed now?" she asked. "Yeah, I would. Sandra's doing a great job as president. They're transparent about finances, they're keeping up with maintenance, and they're not harassing people over stupid stuff. It's what an HOA should be focused on: maintaining property values and common areas, not on exercising petty power." "That's good to hear. I've heard horror stories about HOAs, so I'm always nervous about buying in one. HOAs can be great or terrible, depending on who's running them. Ours is in good hands now, but my advice: read the bylaws carefully before you buy, know what you're agreeing to, and if something doesn't seem right, ask questions and stand up for yourself." Emily smiled. "That's exactly what you did. It is. And I don't regret it, even though it was stressful at the time." She thanked me for my time and left. I went back to my planting, feeling content with how things had turned out. A few weeks later, Marcus and his wife invited me to a neighborhood barbecue they were hosting. About 20 people showed up, including Sandra and Gerald and several other neighbors I'd gotten to know through the whole HOA situation. "Hey, Lucas," Sandra said, pulling me aside at one point. "I wanted to give you a heads up. The county health department sent us a commendation letter. Apparently, our sewer inspection and repairs have been held up as an example of proactive infrastructure management. They're using us as a case study for other HOAs." I raised my eyebrows. Seriously? Seriously? Jennifer Caldwell from the health department said that most HOAs wait until there's a catastrophic failure before they address sewer issues. The fact that we caught ours early and fixed it properly is apparently noteworthy. "Well, that's good, I guess," Sandra smiled. "It is good. And Lucas, I know this whole thing was stressful for you, but I want you to know that a lot of people are grateful. You didn't have to push as hard as you did. You could have just paid the fines and moved on with your life." "I could have," I agreed, "but that wouldn't have been right. Patricia was abusing her power, and the sewer system was being neglected. Someone needed to say something. I'm glad it was you. The barbecue was fun, the kind of neighborhood gathering that felt genuine and relaxed. People laughed and told stories. Kids ran around playing tag, and someone set up a volleyball net for an impromptu tournament. It felt like a real community, not just a collection of houses managed by an overbearing HOA. As the sun started to set and people began packing up to head home, I found myself standing in Marcus's backyard with Gerald, watching the last few kids playing. "You ever think about running for the board?" Gerald asked. I looked at him in surprise. "Me? No way. I don't want that kind of responsibility. You'd be good at it. You're not afraid to ask hard questions, and you actually care about doing the right thing. I appreciate that, but I'm happy just being a regular homeowner. I've had enough drama to last me a lifetime." Gerald laughed. "Fair enough. But if you ever change your mind, let me know. We could use more people like you involved." I thought about his words as I walked home that evening. The past few months had been stressful, frustrating, and sometimes infuriating. But they'd also taught me something important about standing up for yourself and not backing down when you're in the right. The garden gnome that had started the whole mess was still in my front garden, right where it had always been. My mother had given it to me when I bought the house, telling me it would bring me good luck. At the time, I'd thought it was just a silly decoration. Now, looking at its cheerful painted face, I wondered if maybe she'd been right. My grass was exactly 3 inches tall, maintained that way by a lawn service I'd hired to take that particular worry off my plate. My mailbox had been repaired and repainted. My truck sat in my driveway, clean and well maintained. And in my backyard, where the sewer line ran beneath carefully restored grass, there was nothing to indicate the drama that had unfolded over that piece of infrastructure. Everything was as it should be. Spring came to Meadowbrook Hills with dogwoods blooming and azaleas adding splashes of color to every yard. The HOA's new landscaping plan for the common areas was more modest than Patricia's extravagant vision had been, but it was well maintained and appropriate for the neighborhood. Monthly dues had gone up slightly to cover the loan for the sewer repairs, but it was manageable, and people understood the necessity. I ran into Patricia once, in the grocery store parking lot in early April. She was loading bags into her Mercedes when I parked a few spaces away. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought she might ignore me. Instead, she walked over. "Lucas," she said stiffly. "Patricia. How are you?" She looked older than I remembered, tired around the eyes. "I'm fine. I heard the neighborhood is doing well under Sandra's leadership." "It is. She's done a good job." Patricia nodded slowly. "I want you to know that I didn't set out to be a villain. I was trying to maintain standards to keep property values high. I thought I was doing the right thing." I considered her words carefully. "I believe you thought that. But good intentions don't excuse bad behavior. You were harassing people, Patricia. You were fining them for ridiculous things and not focusing on what actually mattered." "I know," she said quietly. "I've had a lot of time to think about it. I let the power go to my head. I started seeing violations everywhere because I wanted to feel important, to feel like I was making a difference. But I made people miserable instead. It was more self-awareness than I'd expected from her." "We all make mistakes," I said. "What matters is what we learn from them." "I've learned that I'm not cut out for leadership," Patricia said with a bitter smile. "My husband and I are actually thinking about moving. I don't think I can face everyone in the neighborhood knowing how badly I screwed up." "That's up to you. But for what it's worth, I don't think most people hate you. They were just frustrated with how things were being run. Sandra's got things on the right track now. The neighborhood is doing well. Sometimes that's the best outcome. Things get better, and we all move forward." Patricia looked like she wanted to say more, but instead she just nodded. "Take care, Lucas." "You too, Patricia." I watched her drive away, feeling an odd mix of sympathy and relief. I hadn't wanted to destroy her life. I just wanted to be left alone to live mine. But she'd pushed, and the situation had spiraled from there. That evening I sat on my back deck with a beer, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Somewhere down the street, kids were laughing. A dog barked. A lawn mower hummed as someone got in one last cut before dark. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Poker night at my place Friday. You in?" I texted back a yes and smiled. Life was good. The sewer main under my property was fixed and functioning properly. The HOA was well managed and reasonable. My garden gnome stood proud in the front yard, unbothered by any threats of fines. Sometimes standing up for yourself led to unexpected consequences and drama you never wanted. But sometimes it also led to positive changes that benefited everyone. The trick was knowing when to push back and when to let things go, when to compromise and when to hold firm. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, through months of stress and conflict with an HOA president who'd forgotten that her job was to serve the community, not to rule over it. But in the end, the sewer main running under my land, the infrastructure I'd used as leverage to protect myself, had become the catalyst for real improvements in Meadowbrook Hills. The easement that granted the HOA access to my property also granted me certain rights and protections. Patricia had tried to ignore those rights, to steamroll over them with fines and threats. But property law existed for a reason, and when pushed, I'd stood on that law and refused to back down. In the months that followed, life in the neighborhood continued peacefully. Sandra ran the HOA with competence and fairness. The sewer system was properly maintained with regular inspections. The reserve fund grew steadily, providing a cushion for future infrastructure needs. And homeowners felt respected rather than harassed, which made for a much more pleasant place to live. Emily Sutton, the woman who'd asked me about the neighborhood, ended up buying a house on Pine Street. She and her husband fit right in, participating in neighborhood events and even volunteering to help with the annual community yard sale. David Brennan and his wife did end up buying a bigger house in the neighborhood, moving from Oak Street to a larger property on Elm. He joked that he felt confident making the investment now that he knew the infrastructure was solid. The Henderson family, who'd been fined for their Halloween decorations staying up one extra day, became active in the HOA, with Mr. Henderson joining the Architectural Review Committee. He brought a common-sense approach to the role, approving reasonable requests and only pushing back on things that would genuinely harm the neighborhood's appearance. As for me, I settled into a comfortable routine. Work was going well. I'd gotten a promotion at the civil engineering firm where I worked, partly because my boss appreciated how I'd handled the HOA situation. Shows you can navigate complicated interpersonal dynamics while standing firm on technical and legal issues, he'd said. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. I joined a recreational softball league and made some friends outside the neighborhood. My mother came to visit and was delighted to see her gnome still standing proudly in my front garden. I told her the whole story, and she laughed until she cried. "I knew that gnome would bring you luck," she said. "More like it brought me trouble that turned into luck," I replied. "Same thing sometimes." One Saturday in June, I was washing my truck in the driveway when Sandra pulled up in her sedan. She got out with a folder in her hand. "Hey, Lucas. Got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" She opened the folder and pulled out a document. "I wanted to show you this before we send it out to all homeowners. It's a new policy we're implementing." I wiped my hands on a towel and took the document. It was titled Property Owner Rights and HOA Responsibilities. "We're creating a formal policy that outlines what rights homeowners have and what the HOA can and can't do," Sandra explained. "We want to make sure everyone understands the boundaries, so we don't end up in another situation like what happened with you." I read through it. The policy was clear and comprehensive, covering everything from the appeals process for fines to the procedure for requesting HOA records. It also explicitly stated that homeowners with easements on their property had the right to request maintenance documentation, and that the HOA would respond within 10 business days. "This is really good," I said. "Wish something like this had existed a year ago." "That's exactly why we're creating it. We learned a lot from what happened. Transparency and clear communication prevent most problems before they start." "I'm impressed, Sandra. You're doing a great job," she smiled. "Thanks. It's been a learning experience for all of us." "Oh, and one more thing, the board voted to formally recognize you at our annual meeting next month. We're giving you an award for your role in identifying the sewer system issues and helping improve HOA governance." I groaned. "Sandra, no. I don't want an award. I just wanted to keep my garden gnome." She laughed. "Too late. The vote already passed. You don't have to give a speech or anything. Just show up and let us say thank you." I shook my head but smiled. "Fine, but I'm not wearing a suit." "Fair enough." The annual meeting in July was held at the clubhouse on a warm evening. More people attended than usual, probably because word had gotten around that there would be food and that Sandra was giving out awards. True to her word, Sandra called me up and presented me with a plaque that read, "Presented to Lucas Xavier in recognition of his dedication to infrastructure integrity and community welfare." It was cheesy, but everyone applauded, and several people came up afterward to shake my hand. "You're a legend, man," one guy said. "You took down Patricia Reynolds and saved us from a sewage disaster. That's impressive." I demurred, insisting I just ask some questions, but people seemed determined to see me as some kind of neighborhood hero. It was embarrassing and flattering at the same time. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, I found myself outside the clubhouse with a small group of neighbors, talking and laughing under the stars. Gerald was there, along with Marcus, David, the Hendersons, and a few others. "You know what the best part of this whole thing is?" Mrs. Henderson said. "We're actually a community now. Before, when Patricia was in charge, everyone was afraid to talk to each other because we didn't want to find out about violations or get reported. Now we actually know our neighbors." It was true. The neighborhood had changed in subtle but important ways. People waved to each other. They stopped to chat. They helped each other out with small things like lending tools or watching packages. It was what suburban life was supposed to be like. "A toast," Marcus said, raising his beer. "To Lucas, for being stubborn enough to stand up to the HOA and smart enough to know how to do it right." Everyone raised their drinks, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Georgia summer heat. This was what it meant to be part of a community, people looking out for each other, supporting each other, and working together to make things better. The months continued to pass, and the drama of the previous year faded into neighborhood lore. New families moved in, and when they asked about the HOA, longtime residents assured them it was well-run and reasonable. Property values stayed strong, helped by the knowledge that the infrastructure was solid and the HOA was financially responsible. I kept my garden gnome right where it was, a constant reminder of where this whole journey had started. My grass stayed at exactly 3 inches, give or take. My truck sat in my driveway without anyone complaining. And underneath my backyard, the sewer main carried waste safely and efficiently to the county system, properly maintained and regularly inspected. Sometimes I thought about Patricia and wondered how she was doing. She and her husband hadn't moved after all. I still saw her car in their driveway sometimes, but she kept a low profile. She'd resigned from all HOA activities and rarely attended neighborhood events. I hoped she'd found peace with how things had turned out. As for me, I'd learned valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of knowing your rights, and about how one person asking the right questions at the right time could change things for the better. I'd also learned that HOAs didn't have to be the enemy. With the right leadership and the right policies, they could actually serve their intended purpose, maintaining property values and common areas while respecting homeowners' rights. One afternoon in October, I was raking leaves in my front yard when a moving truck pulled up to the house across the street. A young couple got out, looking excited and nervous the way people do when they're moving into their first house. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to Meadowbrook Hills. I'm Lucas Xavier." The man shook my hand enthusiastically. "Brandon Foster, this is my wife, Olivia. We're so excited to be here." "It's a great neighborhood," I said. "Good people, well-run HOA, solid infrastructure. You'll like it here." Olivia looked relieved. "That's good to hear. We were worried about the HOA. My parents live in one that's terrible, always fining people for crazy things." I smiled. "Funny you should mention that. Our HOA used to be that way, but things changed. Now it's focused on what matters, maintaining the neighborhood without harassing people." "What changed?" Brandon asked. I glanced at the garden gnome in my front yard, visible from where we stood. Let's just say someone asked the right questions at the right time, and it led to some much-needed reforms. But that's a long story. Right now, you probably need to focus on unpacking. If you need anything, recommendations for restaurants, help moving furniture, whatever, just let me know. We're good neighbors here. They thanked me, and I headed back to my yard work. As I raked leaves into neat piles, I thought about how far things had come in just over a year. From Patricia's clipboard and her list of violations to a neighborhood that actually felt like a community. From the threat of $800 in fines to a plaque recognizing my contribution to the neighborhood. The sewer main still ran under my property, just as it had for 30 years. But now it was properly maintained, regularly inspected, and documented in ways that protected both the HOA and homeowners. The easement remained on my deed, a permanent reminder of the infrastructure that had become the fulcrum for change in Meadowbrook Hills. I'd bought this house 5 years ago looking for a quiet place to live, a safe investment, and a comfortable home. I'd gotten all of that, plus an education in property law, HOA governance, and the importance of standing your ground when you're in the right. The garden gnome watched over it all, silent and cheerful, a $3 decoration that had inadvertently sparked a neighborhood revolution. My mother had been right, it had brought me luck. Not in any mystical sense, but in the way it had forced me to confront an unjust situation and fight back. And in fighting back, I'd helped create something better for everyone. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across my perfectly maintained lawn, I finished my raking and stood back to admire my work. The house looked good. The yard looked good. The neighborhood looked good. And most importantly, I could enjoy it all without worrying about some petty bureaucrat with a clipboard showing up to fine me for imaginary violations. That evening, I sat on my back deck with dinner and a beer, watching the woods behind my property turn golden in the sunset. Somewhere beneath my feet, the sewer main carried on its unglamorous but essential work, properly maintained at last. Above ground, life in Meadowbrook Hills continued peacefully, guided by an HOA that had learned to balance rules with common sense, authority with respect. It had been a strange journey from that first confrontation with Patricia to this moment of peace, but I wouldn't change it. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it causes drama, even when you'd rather just keep your head down and avoid conflict. Because on the other side of that fight, if you do it right, things can be genuinely better for everyone. The garden gnome in my front yard stood as a permanent testament to that truth. And I intended to keep it right where it was for as long as I lived in this house. A cheerful middle finger to arbitrary authority and a reminder that property rights, properly defended, protect us all.